Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, June 24th, 2023, and today we are officially 500 days away from the 2024 presidential election. And with that, I decided that it would be interesting, at least at this milestone, to do a 2024 election prediction. A matchup is what we would call it between the top contenders on both sides of the aisle. Before we actually get into the electoral map, which I will take a little bit less time talking about than I do in traditional election videos, we are going to be talking about the points leading up to it, the primary predictions at where it stands today, and pretty much a general rundown of the 2024 race. To get things very, very easy on the Democratic side, we are going to take a very early and quick look at the 2024 nomination for the Democrats. Right now, Joe Biden is polling roughly 50 points ahead on average, which is a sign, and this is the truest sense of the word, a sign of weakness on the Democratic side when it comes down to an incumbency status, but I don't think this will actually translate to the eventual primary results. I do not think voters will actually turn out in a 2024 primary with an incumbent president. And regardless of where it was, Joe Biden is going to be the nominee in 2024. It doesn't matter whoever enters into the race, Joe Biden will be the nominee and will go on to win the nomination with ease across the United States. There have been challengers to Democratic incumbents before, none as powerful as what we're seeing in polls as RFK Jr., Marianne Williamson, around 5%, hovers around the point that some other Democratic contenders did back in previous elections. But what we're seeing here is that Joe Biden, at roughly 64% when it comes down to the 2024 nomination, is well on track to win renomination. So the Democratic side, we already know. We are saying that Joe Biden is going to be the 2024 nominee, but the Republican side isn't as simple. Donald Trump currently leads roughly 31 points on average above the second place candidate, Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, who is currently hovering at around 21%. Donald Trump on average receiving 52.2% of the Republican Party's preference for the 2024 nomination, giving him a significant advantage over every other candidate in the race. In fact, Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis are the only candidates in double digits nationwide, with the third place candidate being Mike Pence, the former vice president, then to Nikki Haley, the former governor of South Carolina and former UN ambassador under the Trump administration, and South Carolina, yet again, Senator Tim Scott, who is coming in fifth place. So in the top five, you only have two candidates that are really in the top two spot, but one significantly higher than the other. It's not like how it was in 2016, where there were multiple candidates around 2 years out that were doing quite well when it came down to the national numbers. Where we were a year ago, you saw multiple candidates up for the top position. At this point in time, actually, nearly, 8 years ago today. What is today? Today is June 24th, so let me go ahead and find the exact day. Jeb Bush was at 13, Scott Walker was at 11, Marco Rubio was at 11, Ben Carson was at 10, Mike Huckabee was at 9. There was no clear consensus as to who the nominee was going to be. It was a very interesting time frame. It was a very fascinating one, and Donald Trump ultimately is doing way better than he was 8 years ago today. In fact, when Donald Trump first announced his bid in 2016, he was polling at single digits. So I'm going to call the race now. I think Donald Trump wins the nomination in 2024. Do I think Ron DeSantis is able to pick off some states? Yes, I do. I think he could win states such as Utah or even other states where you have Republicans that are more anti-Trump than the rest. But with roughly 13 candidates in the race today, I believe Donald Trump, as the former president, simply has the best shot, which means that he's going to be up for the 2024 nomination again, but I do not believe that he would run with Vice President Mike Pence again. In many people's eyes, we have seen Mike Pence viewed on the Republican side as a traitor to the president, as someone who refused to intervene and overturn the 2020 election results. Even though it was outside his possibility, outside his ability as the vice president, he was still blamed for a lot of what we saw. And Mike Pence, now announcing his bid, has received a lot of criticism, not only from the former president, but other Make America Great Again aligned Republicans on the side of the aisle. If I was to place my bets today, I think that Senator Tim Scott or former Governor Nikki Haley would be chosen as Donald Trump's VP. I think it's very clear that Donald Trump needs someone who can balance him, not someone who is exactly him. He would never choose Chris Christie. He's not going to choose Ron DeSantis at this point, even though in months past, back in December 2021 or 2022, he floated Ron DeSantis as a potential VP pick. Had he chosen him, maybe the status of this race would be different. But I don't think he'll choose Chris Christie. I do not think he'd choose Doug Burgum. I don't think he'd choose Ron DeSantis. I think his pick would either be Nikki Haley or Tim Scott, both of which hailing from the same home state. They balance his level of unpresidentialism, his non-political correctness. I think both of them provide an opportunity to balance the ticket in a way that former Vice President Mike Pence was also able to do. So now that we have it, we have our general understanding about where we think the 2024 race is going to go. Donald Trump with Haley or Scott as the VP, Biden with Harris. You have a 2024 matchup that is nearly identical to the 2020 presidential election. And with that, a lot of the states are going to stay roughly the same. You aren't going to see this super major shift across any of the major states that we already know to be safe or solid for one side of the aisle. For instance, and I say this every time, but it's important to note, no, the Republicans will not be winning in New Jersey. I've seen some takes online and amongst the Republican press that New Jersey is going to be a potentially competitive state, citing the 2021 governor elections. I do not think this at all. We will see it easily go to the incumbent president. And, a lot of these states, especially given they are in a matchup between similar to 2020, in fact, nearly identical to 2020, because everything but the VP nominee on the Republican side will be the exact same, you are going to find that most of these states really aren't going to budge much. Continuing on this map, the Democrats currently are at 180 solid electoral votes. That's roughly where they will stand, with the exception and now inclusion of the state of Colorado and Maine's 1st Congressional District. Maine's 1st Congressional District shouldn't shock that many people. It's been safe for Democrats for years, but Colorado recently has taken a turn in favor more so of Democrats than what we might expect. And while some people may disagree with this characterization as a former swing state, a state that George W. Bush won in 2000 and 2004, Colorado is a state I truly believe will be solid for Democrats moving forward. In 2020, Joe Biden won the state by 14 points. In 2022, Democrats won the state on the Senate level by 15 points, and then on the governor level, you can see here too. Let's see if Colorado even shows up. It wasn't even competitive enough to show up on this map, but we're going to go to the state here because I think it's an important thing to note if we are going to be talking about these safe characterizations. Jared Polis won this race by nearly 20 points against Heidi Ganahl. This is a race that shows just how partisan Colorado has become. And I do believe there would be an improvement for Biden in a matchup against Trump in the state of Colorado. So that brings us to 191 for the Democrats. Where does Donald Trump get his safe margin states? Well, Idaho, Utah even, Wyoming, North and South Dakota, nearly all of Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana. We're going to continue down the list. It doesn't make sense to just go through them and say them state by state. So here's where we are. Roughly about 109 electoral votes for the GOP we can characterize. Actually, let's see here, making sure that we have every single state covered. When it comes down to the safe margins, actually Kansas, we're going to remove, but Republicans are going to win it. So don't, get scared there. What we're seeing here, though, is in terms of the safe states that Donald Trump's going to win by 15 points or more, I really only see 103 electoral votes on this side. I don't think he's going to do well enough that he's going to win a lot of these states by above 15 points. And the same thing can be said for Joe Biden, but he's already at a better point at 191. But I promise you, a lot of these big states, a lot of these outspoken states right now where we do not have a characterization, Kansas, South Carolina, Montana, they are red states. They will go to Donald Trump, and there is no way to get around that. But what I will say is that given how close they were in the last election, I do believe they would be slightly closer in this one against, again, this rematch between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, especially given January 6th, given the multiple indictments, the arraignment of the former president. There has been a lot here, a fractured Republican Party. I mean, there has truly been a lot here that has made it very difficult for Donald Trump to come into this unscathed, for Donald Trump to come into this in a position of power, in a position of electability, even though I think he will still do well in many swing states. You will see he's not going to have just 103 electoral votes by the end of this, but I do think he has been tainted. He has been damaged, and ultimately, the Republican Party might want him to be the nominee, but I've been saying this for months now. I don't think he's the most electable by a long shot. So we're going to continue through. We're going to characterize all of the likely red states: Kansas, South Carolina, Montana, Alaska. I think Alaska is going to stay there for a while. These are states where I think that Donald Trump's going to win just by anywhere between 5 to 15 points. It's not going to be a blowout, but it's still going to be a victory. Even swing states such as Iowa and Ohio, I would say, are likely red states. And this is a big one, but I do believe the state of Florida, though a state that Donald Trump won in 2016 by a point, won in 2020 by 3 points, he wins by 6 to 8 points in 2024. That's where I'm at, especially given the significant growth in Republican characterization or identification since the 2020 election, the influx of hundreds of thousands of inter-United States citizens migrating to the state of Florida from states, an exodus from other states, not necessarily blue states, just in general during the COVID-19 pandemic. Ron DeSantis' open borders, open up the state type of mentality was displayed in full force across the country, and many people moved to the state of Florida. They have had one of the biggest influxes in terms of population across the United States. Florida reign supreme as a state where Republicans are going to do quite well. A state that Donald Trump won by 3, that went on to 20-point victories for Marco Rubio and Ron DeSantis. I do not think Democrats have a realistic shot at Florida unless even more damage is done to the Trump brand that makes voters not even turn out in this state. But Florida, I think, unfortunately for Democrats, and I hate to be someone who's, dooming on states because I do believe inherently all parties should fight for swing states and all states, but mostly swing states because election-wise, that makes sense. But Florida is one of those states where I think, do Democrats have a better chance at Texas? Yes. Truly speaking, yes. It might not be as if, you're talking about Republicans still likely to win both, and that'll get to my point when I cover the state of Texas. But do I think that moving forward in the future that Texas is more winnable? The answer is yes. The state of Florida has seen, again, an influx of hundreds of thousands of voters, hundreds of thousands of people within the United States that moved to the state of Florida largely under the COVID-19 pandemic. Think about the type of person that moves to Florida. I'm going off on a tangent here, but it's important. Think about the type of person that moves to Florida during the COVID-19 pandemic, probably someone who aligns very heavily with the Republican Party's stances on COVID-19, on dropping the mask mandate, on not enforcing vaccine requirements in any sense, not even having the vaccine available. Those are the voters that would drive this state rightward and did so in 2022 and will continue to do so. That brings the Republicans to 178, but we're done there. Those are the last of it when it comes down to states that I believe Democrats and Republicans are going to win by safe or likely margins. Brings us to 191 to 178, which means these remaining states are going to be decided by very narrow margins, which means it truly can go either way. But this is where I think we are right now. I think the Democrats also, I completely forgot. We are not at 191 to 178. I forgot the likely blue states of Minnesota, of Maine, of Virginia, and New Mexico, all states that I believe, also New Hampshire, that against this matchup, against Donald Trump, would be likely blue states. So actually, it's a lot better for the Democrats for Joe Biden than what initially was led on here. You're at 225 to 178 with 135 remaining toss-up electoral votes. But again, truly can go either way. I mean, Democrats might have the upper hand here, but Hillary Clinton also received more electoral votes than what Joe Biden is at when it comes down to this safe and likely characterization. So 135 remaining, 178 for Trump, 225 for Biden. Let's continue talking about some of these lean states where Democrats and Republicans are probably going to win by anywhere of 1 to 5 points, but it could still see a change in direction, giving on the trajectory of the nation and these candidates as we move forward. Since Republicans are behind, we're going to go ahead and characterize the states for the Democrats on the lean side. We start off with the big one, the state of Texas, where the Democratic Party does have a fighting chance in the future, but I don't think they're going to beat Donald Trump in this state. They were very hopeful back in 2020, and ultimately they did come quite close. Texas went from a state that in 2012 went to Mitt Romney by 17 points, then went to Trump by 9 points, then went to Trump by 6 points. It is a clear and consistent trajectory trend in favor of the left wing. But it also is at a point where this state, yes, Democrats do have a reasonable shot at narrowing it up, but I do not think they win in 2024, which leads me to believe that Donald Trump does against Joe Biden. And almost immediately, the state of Texas jumps up towards the Democratic Party. But this seems to be one of the few remaining states that they have the ability to do quite well in. Maine's 2nd congressional district goes to the Republicans by about a lean characterization. I don't think it will be big. I think it will be reduced and narrowed down based off where it was back in 2020. And now we're moving on to the Democrats, at least for their lean states. And newsflash for the viewer here, for you, is that Joe Biden wins this election matchup. We start off with the Rust Belt, which I believe would go to the Democrats by a lean margin. As it stands today, the Democratic Party has a very viable shot at victory in 2024 through the Rust Belt without the state of Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, keeping all the states Hillary Clinton won back in 2016 except Nevada, and then winning the Rust Belt, as the Democrats did in 2020. You can win the election. And guess what? That one electoral vote that puts Joe Biden over the top is Nebraska's 2nd congressional district, which went to Democrats in 2020 by a margin of about 7 points. This time around, I think it will be closer because Republicans gerrymandered the district to make it slightly more conservative. But what I will say is that those House results in 2022 do not exactly show a super impressive result. Don Bacon won by just 3 points in a district that was made to be significantly more conservative. You're talking 3 to 4 points for a swing district. That's a lot. In 2020, this district was decided by 2 points, right? So it made a narrow improvement, but when you apply that to the presidential results, that improvement should have given a decisive Republican victory. So a Biden plus 7 district is probably reducing down to a Biden plus 4 or 5 district. Even then, though, it's a victory for Democrats. But this characterization in this winning margin doesn't just end here. It's not just going to be 270 to 219. Democrats are still going to win the same states they did in 2020, even by a larger margin. Now, it might seem extreme seeing Georgia, Arizona as lean blue states, but keep in mind this is a 1 to 5 point margin. Democrats did win Georgia in 2020 by 0.2. They did win Arizona in 2020 by 0.3. But what this tells me, especially looking back at the 2022 results, because this is important, that states like Arizona and Georgia punish candidates when they are aligned heavily with Donald Trump. It happened in 2018, that happened in full force in 2022, and 2020, at least on the presidential level, should have been that very obvious moment that, hey, Donald Trump is no longer palatable to the swing voters of Georgia and Arizona. And it becomes, a very difficult point, to make this argument that we would see a significant improvement for Joe Biden, or at least somewhat significant on the electoral map. And this would be somewhat significant because it's about 2 states, Georgia and Arizona, that under a traditional election with a traditional conservative, I could very well see going red. There's states that for reasonable Republicans in 2022 went in their direction. Brian Kemp being the most notable example, winning by 8 points across the state of Georgia. Brad Raffensperger winning by double digits across the state of Georgia. These are what we call the traditional, the old conservatives, but Donald Trump makes it difficult for that to happen. He's not one of those conservatives. He's not one of the electable conservatives. And that is a problem for the GOP. Joe Biden, though he is unpopular, though we are not in as best of a position as I think, the Democrats are arguing we are in when it comes down to the economy or social issues or whatever it might be, there are still things that Joe Biden did not deliver on. But there are a lot of things that he did. But the problem is, for Republicans at least, is that the standard convention that Donald Trump threw out the window also negatively impacts him too. What was an issue of economic policy, an issue of social policy, an issue of general stances on policy, Mitt Romney, Barack Obama, John McCain, John Kerry, George Bush, that era of politics is no more. And these very few and in-between remarks when it comes down to issues of abortion, gay marriage, transgender rights, these are things that are starting to captivate the nation in these culture wars, as we have seen displayed in full force over the past few years. And Republicans are losing. The majority of America stands with LGBT Americans on gay marriage. The majority of America stands with, you see, the Democratic Party at least, when it comes down to many of these issues, when it comes down to healthcare, when it comes down to abortion. And while we are seeing some pushback on, some walkbacks at least in terms of the view on abortion, a few points nationwide, the view on gay marriage, a few points nationwide, Democrats are building this campaign out to be an issue of these top few points. And Republicans are doing no benefit to their election by propping up someone like Donald Trump who only feeds into this narrative. Someone who feeds into it, or Ron DeSantis even, who signed a 6-week abortion ban in the state of Florida and is now trying to argue to the nation that he represents the nation's interest when 70% of the country believes in legalized abortion. There is a problem. There is a disconnect between the top 2 and the rest of America. That's exactly why, again, that standard convention in any other reality, a president with an approval rating in the low 40s, sometimes high 30s, with all of these issues, under his presidency. And not to say that there aren't things that he can campaign on. He is campaigning on the passage of infrastructure, chips, whatever it might be, the Protect Marriage Act, whatever it might be. Joe Biden has things to run on. But it is these very surface level ideas about the election. It's the economy, stupid, that makes us believe that almost any Republican would be able to do well in this election. But quite frankly, they just aren't, because voters care about different things than what we have seen considered. That's exactly what 2022 showed us. You know, what this election showed us was that, hey, in 2022, that Republicans, backed by Donald Trump, backed by the more right-wing conservative part of the nation, were punished. Even though they were trying to say, you know, look at the president's approval rating, look at the state of the economy, look at the state of the nation, and argue to us that Democrats should be reelected. And Republicans thought that they could hammer that in so well that they could put up anyone and they would win. You know, Kevin McCarthy was predicting 50 to 60 seats gain in the House, didn't even have a net gain of more than 10. In the Senate, it was the easiest Senate map to win, the easiest Senate elections to win. All you needed was one seat. They lost a seat. This election was proof in the pudding that the Democratic Party, when they build out the narrative of the election, making the election about these social issues, they win. And they're doing it again because Donald Trump is giving the ammunition to do so, which is why I believe not only does Joe Biden win, but he expands on his 2020 states, solidifies the blue wall, locks down New Mexico, Virginia, Minnesota, and New Hampshire, all swing states from prior elections, and wins North Carolina. Narrows down the Republican victories in Texas, Iowa, Ohio, even Alaska that could benefit Mary Peltola in that congressional race the Democrats currently hold on to. I mean, Joe Biden running in this election, this 2024 election matchup between the two, I truly believe will be very strong for the Democratic Party. I think as it stands, 500 days away, Joe Biden wins 319 to the Republicans 219. Things can change. Donald Trump may not choose Nikki Haley or Tim Scott. Donald Trump may not even be the nominee in 2024. But we will see what happens, because as elections change, so does the type of way that we address this content. We look at the 2024 election, the way the analysis changes. We could see a lot happen. But honestly speaking, my prediction is the same as it was following the 2020 election, that we're in for a rematch, and it will be very interesting and probably equally as entertaining and important as the last election. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.